very first experiment if you want to try it for the first time. So if you want to do that. The first thing I tell people when they're starting with either a garden in their backyard or container gardening, look at your location. Because there's very, very few vegetables out there that do well in shade. I have a garden in my yard that is on the north side of my fence. And I'm finding the only thing that does even halfway decent in shade is your root vegetables. Like I can still get a decent carrot, a decent cucumber, or a decent beet, or something like that in the shade. But if you're going with 100% shade, you're very, very, very limited on what you're going to be able to grow. So that's a very important thing, is look at your location, where you're going to have to put your pots, or where you're going to have to put your small garden. And then you can decide from there what you can plant. To me, the best part of gardening is not the seeding and not the planting or even the harvesting. I have a great time picking out what I want to plant. You're nodding, yeah. I have catalogs and I'm going through and things are highlighted and things are marked off, and then I go back and say, well, I need a whole farm to plant all this stuff that I've marked off, but then I go back and just remembering when you're picking out things, when you're looking at container gardening and small area gardening, look at space-wise. Pumpkins, squash, all these things that take massive amounts of area, and you've only got a 6x6 garden plot or something, well, you're going to put 2 pumpkin plants in the middle and it's going to take your whole garden. So really, really look at, like even cucumbers. There's all the cucumbers that you can plant that are just small bushes. You can put 3 or 4 cucumber plants in a very small area, have it overrun a little bit onto your grass, and you can get an abundance of cucumbers. Or you can get a cucumber variety that you put 3 or 4 plants in, and it's going to take up 3/4 of your garden. So it's really important when you're looking at small space or container gardening, you look at the variety. Most catalogs or seed packages will tell you if they're for containers. And if they are, say, containers, that means they're good also for small space gardening. A lot of people nowadays in the city who have small gardens are going not so much to even rows in their gardens. They're going square foot gardening, and I don't know if very many of you know what square foot gardening is. Yeah. Yeah, and you can get a lot more when you take, excuse me, when you divide your garden up and say your carrots, instead of planting them in rows and putting them this far apart, you can mark off the square and just broadcast the seed in that square, and then just have a very small path around that. A lot of people will even mix their carrots and radish seeds together and broadcast them in that area, and as they're picking their radishes, they're thinning it out enough to make room for their carrots to grow. So you're getting kind of a double bang for your buck in that way, because you can get 2 vegetables in the same area. Or another thing you can do when you're planting your gardens is maybe plant like your lettuce and your carrots close together. Your carrots are going to grow later, and your lettuce and spinach and everything will be done earlier, so there's always room for expansion. So really do a lot of research when you're planting what is going to be really, really early and what's going to be late, because you can plant them very, very close together and one will thin out and be gone before the next one starts to take over. I don't know if Miriam was nice enough to put some trellises out here for me. Another thing when you're going with small area gardening, I have a gentleman who comes in to me, and on the east and west and south sides of his fence, because the way his yard faces, he has gardens about this wide. And what he does is he makes netting, good netting, and hooks it to the top of his fence, and then brings it out about 1.5 feet on the bottom. He has peas growing up there, because you can go with the pull varieties, beans growing up there, cucumbers, and all he has is a 2-foot garden, and it all grows up. So when you're looking at small area gardening, you have to start thinking vertical instead of horizontal. You've got to train things to go up. So there's all kinds of things. Like we have done out at the farm for peas, is we made them, I don't know how many years ago, we just took 1x2 boards, pointed them on the bottom, stapled chicken wire to them, and all you have to do is pull them out in the fall, store them somewhere, take them, put them back in the garden, and my peas grow up, my beans grow up. When you're looking at small square foot gardening, you're not going to be doing corn and stuff like that, because corn has to be done in 3-foot rows. It just...
I did it with small, like a little area, and it actually worked.
You have to have at least 9
Yep.
plants,
And you
3x3, and you have to make sure either they're going to get wind, or you're going to have the time to go out there and shake them and get that pollen going. But really, on 9 plants, if they all produce and you have the right size, the maximum you're going to get is 18 pods. Pure and simple. So if you're looking at room-wise, you might not want to go with something that's going to take a lot of room. Most people who do square foot gardening tend to stick with carrots, beets, lettuce, spinach, the smaller things, and then along the edges they put their trellising up, and they have cucumbers, peas, beans. For a family like if it was just my husband and me, and nobody who shopped at my house, and I didn't want to process anything, I could plant enough in a small area to keep us going all summer. You can also reseed, like a lot of people in small gardens will tell them. Like at the farm, I plant 50-foot row lettuce, half of it we don't use. There you can plant, say, 1.5 foot of lettuce 1 week, 2-3 weeks later, plant another 1.5 foot. It can keep you going all summer. So a lot of people just don't realize in a very small area, if you do your research on what works, you can get a tremendous amount of vegetables out of a little 6x6 garden. Or if you don't want to have a garden, like there's a lot of young people who have kids in these small yards that don't want a garden in the middle of their yard because they want some area for their kids to play. So, do like this older gentleman I have. Do a 2-foot along the fence. You still got the whole inside of your yard for your kids to play, but a 2-foot garden wide along the fence, growing up, will give you a tremendous amount of vegetables as well. But again, it's sit back, do your research. A lot of people are going to container gardening. Container gardening is very similar to square foot gardening, but there are some things that excel in a pot versus in the ground. I do tumbler tomatoes in a pot this size. Whoops, I fell over. I put 2 plants in this pot. If it's well taken care of, and I mean fertilized regularly, you have to fertilize pots at least every 10 days. Because you think out in your garden, the roots of these plants have all that area to draw nutrients from. In a pot, they've got this. Once that nutrient is used up, and if you don't replenish it, you're not going to get anything. Same as water. Even though your ground may look dry in your garden, it's still got the roots to go down. It can still draw moisture from all over the place in the garden where there is moisture. In a pot, once this pot is dry, it's dry. There's nothing you can do about it. So, container gardening, you have to do a lot of fertilizing, you have to do a lot of watering. And like a gentleman came in here the other day and asked me, they're going to the lake for 3 weeks over the summer. And they do all container gardening. And I said, he says, well, how can I keep it growing? I said, you don't have anybody who can come water it. He said, no. And I said, well, then put them in the trunk of your car and take them with you to the lake, because they're going to be dead by the time you get back. Unless you get a lot of rain, no water for 3 weeks, they're not going to make it. So I said, okay, put them in the trunk of the car, take them to the lake with them. But in a pot this size, if I put 2 tumbler tomatoes, and it is well taken with care of with the water and the fertilizer, you can get easy 400 cherry tomatoes in one pot. Well, I don't know about you, but 400 cherry tomatoes is a lot of tomatoes, because I know I take buckets and I give them, and I send them with my husband to work and everything like that. Peppers. Last year we did an experiment with peppers. Peppers at the farm, peppers in my city garden, and peppers in pots. All the exact same variety, all started on the same day, all planted on the same day. A pot this size with 2 plants in, I got roughly 30 bell peppers off of picking. I started picking when they were about this big, and by the end of the season they were red and that big. Out at the farm, I got maybe 1 off some of the plants. A lot of the plants I got nothing. In my city garden, I probably got 4 off of a plant. Peppers are another thing that need a lot of heat. I don't know if many of you know, but with peppers, if the nighttime temperature drops below 10 degrees, it drops its blossom. It does not produce a pepper from that blossom. Whereas in pots, if you put a pepper pot on the south side of your house, either on soil or on patio, all during the day, that sun is absorbed into your foundation, into your patio, into the pot, and at night, that foundation and that cement patio gives back the heat. Even though the temperature might go below 10 degrees Celsius, you're getting enough heat around that the flowers won't drop. And that's why you tend to, if you have a pot and you put it on the south side where it gets really hot, even though you have to water and fertilize, your production will be amazing. So, you know, those are a few things people don't think of with container gardening is you can kind of move. These containers aren't that heavy even when they're filled with dirt. And if you're just going to go with tomatoes and peppers, you can even put in the bottom here. I have some little upside down, little old pots that I put upside down in the bottom, so you don't even have to fill the whole thing with soil because they have a root system, but there's lots of root area in here for peppers and tomatoes with that upside down pot in it. So they're fairly light. So if you're at home during the day and you really don't have a south side of your house that you can put wood, you can move these pots around and they can absorb that heat wherever you put them. So for peppers, I would recommend pots over gardens at any time. They just really produce a lot better. Even cherry tomatoes, like you can get the cherry tomatoes like the Tiny Tim and stuff that are really quite sturdy that will do well in a garden, but you're not going to get the production of something like a tumbler or a tumbling tom. You're not going to get the 400. So if you've got the room for a couple pots, and then if you're going to the lake, you can stick it in the trunk and you can eat tomatoes and peppers at the lake. A lot of people are going to continue. Yeah. I'll show you this one. And this is one of my favorite pots. Not only the color, but it's self-watering. It works wonderful for things like lettuce, spinach, radishes, and you would be amazed how, you know, how when you plant your radishes in the garden, how most of the time you throw 3/4 of them out because they're full of worms since they've taken all the chemicals off that you can control those. You don't tend to get the worms in your radishes in a pot when you're using, like you put sterilized soil in there and it doesn't have the eggs for the maggots and everything in it because it's sterilized. You don't have near the problem with worms in your vegetables either. So in a pot like this, you can do kind of double duty. In the middle here, to make it look pretty, if you're into looking pretty, you can plant either Swiss chard, like your bright light Swiss chard that's really all different colors, or you could plant even little finger carrots, because the foliage on carrots is actually really quite pretty. You could plant those in the middle. You could plant some radishes over here, you could plant some lettuce over here, you could plant some spinach over here. You know, you can do, in this little container here, you could probably have enough for a couple, for 2-3 weeks of salad fixings out of it if you just went with the lettuces and the spinach and the radish, even green onions.
What kind of spinach would you use? Because I haven't had luck with spinach. I don't know why.
I'm partial to either the Thai or the Melody because they tend not to bolt as quickly. Too with spinach too, once you see it starting to bolt, if you can get on it, if you've got the time to get on it and snip those flowers off, it'll stay a lot longer. If you get the flowers on it, then you'll find that the leaves start to dry up and things like that. But that spinach and things that bolt quickly are the same as herbs. If you want to do a herb garden, don't ever let your herbs go to flower. If you ever want to do an experiment, plant some basil or oregano and taste the leaves before they go to flower. After they go to flower, taste the leaves. They get so bitter. So a lot of people are doing herb gardens. I don't do herb gardens in a pot like this. I do them.
And don't put crystal things in for her.
You actually shouldn't put crystal things in any vegetable.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to put those water retainers in, mix it in with your soil. Actually, if you read the labeling,
It doesn't say. Yeah.
it doesn't. But like they've got it in, like the number 7 Sunshine Mix has those water saver crystals in it, and those will say, do not use for vegetables. There's some of the other bags of soil out there that have the water retainers in it. It'll say, do not use for vegetables. They're made up of some kind of chemical composition, and they're great for flowers. You don't want to have your vegetables sucking up that into the roots. So, you know, I hate to say it, but try and... A lot of people wick their water. And what they'll do is, we used to have them here and we don't anymore, but you might be able to find them somewhere like Lee Valley. And what it is if they're going away for 2 or 3 days and they need to they don't have anybody to water, there's wicks you can buy. And you put one end of the wick into a 5-gallon pail and the other end into the soil. And what it does is it wicks water all weekend. It's a bit of a pain and it's kind of unsightly, but if you only do it for when you're going away, it's not so bad.
Would self-watering work? I don't do self-watering for herbs, but would it work for herbs? Yeah.
It should.
It's the same concept.
Okay, same concept. I do herbs in pots like this.
Yeah.
I start them early under my grow lights. I don't know if any of you have ever grown herbs and tried to transplant basil. Basil does not transplant. So what I do,
It likes to be in a pot by itself, doesn't it? Basil?
and if you transplant it, like if you start it in the house and you take these little plants to go transplant into here, most of the time, and I've got a lot of experience with this, I still lose probably 50% of them. They don't, like their roots are very, very sensitive. It's maybe not so bad if you buy them in a pot just with one plant in a greenhouse, but if you start them at home yourself and like broadcast them into a plant and then go to transplant them into the bigger pots, you're going to end up losing a lot. Basil just doesn't like to move. So what I tend to do is I take a pot like this, and probably in about another month I'll seed basil in the middle and I'll seed some oregano around the outside. And if you want something a little higher in the middle, you can maybe even seed some dill in the middle, a couple basil plants around the outside, oregano, and you can have your own thyme.
Okay, if you put out that something like that in a month, like I'm running out of light, like I don't have a greenhouse at home, like I have just lights. Would that just work on the soft number?
You might find, like basil and stuff, you can pinch back to make it bush out, and that's what you would find you would have to do. You'd have to, you know how, I don't have a plant in here, but...
Yeah, pinch back basil.
You know how your center growth, those new little leaves start growing, and once it gets about this high and it's starting to look like a wet noodle, just reach in there and pinch out that center growth, and it will... A lot of people too like to use one type of fertilizer. They like to buy a fertilizer that they can use for everything. And even though the 20-20-20 fertilizers say that they're like like a fertilizer that everybody uses because it's so even. If it's me, I strongly recommend using, if you're only going with one, go with the 15-30-15. That higher middle number is what promotes your root development and what promotes your stem. So even though you're not going to get as much, like I start with the 10-50-2-10 because I like that the best because that gives you that really strong stem. It gives you good roots that are going to take hold. It doesn't give you this quick grow on the top. So I start with the 10-52-10 when I'm going, and when I'm seeding and and they start to grow, I go with it at quarter strength. The first fertilizing, and then the next fertilizing is half strength. The next fertilizing is full strength. If you give these little tiny plants too much nitrogen, you're going to end up with plants this high with a stem about the quarter of this, and first time they get any gust of wind or anything, they're just going to go like this. So it's really, really important you don't give your plants too much nitrogen. The last number is your potash. It's kind of your disease fighter and everything like that. That number could be a little bit bigger, but if you're planting outside with any soil that you use from your garden, Saskatchewan soil is basically not too bad for potash. So the middle number to me, if you're doing pots, is the most important. So I tend to buy a big container, a 10-52-10. I use until usually about the middle of June, and then I switch to a 15-30-15. That middle number will promote your blossoming. That's what you want in peppers, you want in cucumbers, you want in tomatoes, you want it in anything that blooms, your peas, whatever. You want that higher middle number to promote that blossoming. So in a container, you have to fertilize. Like, I'm kind of a lazy person when remembering things. You have to fertilize at least every 10 days. But I've also found a quick and easy way to remember to fertilize. When your watering can, I have a 5-gallon watering can. When I fill that watering can, I put just a little bit of fertilizer in it, and even though it's not the full strength as how they're recommending on the thing, I fertilize a little bit every time I water, and I have a tremendous crop. Like, when you think 2 little tiny pepper plants can give you 40 or 50 peppers, but it all comes down to taking care. Container gardening is a lot more work because you can't rely on anybody else to fertilize it or water it or anything. You have to do it. So, but the rewards are substantial. If you live in an apartment, this thing is just not going to cooperate. If you live in an apartment and have balconies, that's nice. These fit over your balcony railing. So even though the back half of your balcony may be in the shade, maybe where your railing is out in the sun. And you can put, like, it's surprising how much spinach and lettuce and stuff can take a wind as well. So even though if you only have a balcony, you're not limited when it comes to growing things. You've got your railings and
the ceiling. Yeah, the ceiling.
Yeah, and like too, you can grow vegetables in hanging baskets. Please don't go with a little 8-inch hanging basket. If you can get a 12-inch hanging basket, you can grow tomatoes in there. You can grow lettuce and all that stuff in there. Those 8-inch hanging baskets, I'm still not really sure why anyone even uses them, because they dry out so quick. And as soon as anything in these hanging baskets get root bound, well, anything gets root bound, it doesn't do well. I don't know if you've noticed, but when you buy hanging pots in the greenhouses in the spring, you know how they look so beautiful. They're full of blooms, and a month later, they don't look so well. Well, they plant them, you know, they fill them up, they put lots of plants in them, and they tend to get so overcrowded that it chokes each other out. Well, the same will happen with vegetables. So that's why when you're doing vegetable gardening, put things in there. Just remember, everything's going to grow. So if you put Swiss chard in the middle, it's going to grow. So put something around the outside that you can use earlier, like your lettuce or your spinach. That'll be gone, and what's in the center can grow. But it's really, like I say, it's really important when you're doing square foot gardening or small area gardening or container gardening to do your research on your plants. And to me, that's the best part of it. Not the work once you get it all done. It's picking out what you want to put in there. I gave you on those sheets a few lists of a few things that will do well in containers. And even and that goes as well in square feet gardening, because like I said, you don't want to buy a cucumber that is going to spread across half your yard. You want to get something like your fanfare, something that's a small, keeps to a small plant but produces lots. Even though you've had luck with your pumpkins and stuff in a pot, it's not something I recommend for the ordinary person to plant, because